Yeah, hey
Hi,
Jordan.
everyone. Hey. Hey, everyone, and welcome to our fall installment of the Student National Association of Teachers of Singing chat for 2023. If this is your first time joining, we're glad you've tuned in. I'm Jordan Reynolds, and this is Austin Vitaliano.
Hello, hello.
Good to see you. Um, Pursuing a career in vocal pedagogy challenges us to understand the state of voice pedagogy in academia and as an industry. If you're a student or teacher curious about that landscape, its potential directions and barriers, and what opportunities you might find in the field, this is the episode for you. Before we introduce our guest for today's discussion, we want to acknowledge a few things. One, if you've joined us during our live stream, welcome. Your comments will show up in real time, and we'd love to hear from you. Send us your reactions, questions you have, and topics that you want to hear for a future discussion. Please remember, be excellent to each other, no divisive or inflammatory remarks, please, and enjoy the show. Awesome. Austin, who are we bringing on today?
Thanks, Jordan. I'm really excited to bring in our guests for this evening for the fall SNATS Chat. We're going to be welcoming Kayla Gautereaux, who is assistant professor of voice at Boston Conservatory at Berklee. She guides the MFA musical theater vocal pedagogy students through the thesis research, writing, and defense process, and also Nicholas Perna, who is the vice president of outreach at NATS. If you've seen that face before, that's who we'll be talking to today. Jordan, we were talking about this. We thought it was really important to bring on Kayla and Nicholas because of their wealth of real world pedagogy experience. They're both really active in the NATS community as well as the SNATS community, and work with both students and chapter boards as advisors and leaders in the space. So who better than to talk about the ecology, the industry right now than two people who are living it every single day. So and what's funny enough, we've intersected with both of them, but one in particular that I was wondering if you can tell us more about how we know Kayla and got her on the show.
Sure. Yeah, we know Kayla from our New England Conservatory days. So it, we both studied with Dr. Ian Howell. We all studied, actually. All three of us studied with Dr. Ian Howell in vocal pedagogy at that time. And so yeah, it's great to have Kayla back on the show and get a chance to talk about what she's been up to in the what, 5 years since we graduated.
Gosh, I cannot believe it. Well, let's. I think that's a perfect way to see how our roads have intersected. Why don't we bring both of them on? We'll have a little bit of a chat, and let's just dive right into the show. Okay.
Sounds
Let's
amazing.
see.
And
And
Nick.
Austin.
Hello,
Hi.
hello. Hey, everyone. So we were just talking, Kayla, about how we came to speak to you and bring you on the show, and this isn't the first time that we've met before. So we were just talking about our past a little bit, and our time at New England Conservatory. So it's just kind of full circle how we've come together again. It's a small world, right?
It is. It is a very small world, and it is great to be in your presence again, be it virtually.
Yeah. I feel like especially in the land of vocal pedagogy, you get to know
Yeah,
each other pretty quick.
absolutely.
Yeah, and it kind of brings us to our first question. We were telling our audience before we had brought you in why Jordan and I thought it was really important to bring you, Kayla, and you, Nicholas, with your wealth of real world pedagogy experience. You're both active in the NATS and SNATS community. You work with students on a day-to-day basis in this world, and so we thought, who better to talk about what's happening in the space and what you would like to see in this growth of this space as well. So before we dive into all that, can we just start at the beginning? A little bit about your background. Whoever wants to go first, Kayla or Nicholas. How did you originally get involved, and what was your path? How did you get here today?
Kayla, go.
All right, I'll go. Well, I've been thinking about this a lot because you were so gracious as to send me a list of questions that we would be talking about. So I really got to think about it for a while. Like, how did I get here? And I have to say, I'm going to nod to my dad, which I rarely do. But my dad sang to me. My dad did a great job of singing to me. And I have a very broad range of 1950s-esque lullabies that he sang to me and ditties from commercials that he knew. Now, I have to say, though, he doesn't carry a tune. So I know all the words and I have all of the love for these songs. And I have all of the love that he was showing me by singing to me. But I don't know their melodies because he didn't know their melodies. And I really think that constant display of love from him, showing me who he was and what he was interested in through his music choices, as a parent, was really inspiring for me, and it just always drew me into singing. So as soon as I could make a choice of my extracurricular activities, it was always chorus, it was always singing. I did the girls chorus thing in church choirs. I pursued my own voice lessons. I went to a high school that was very much arts centered. I actually met my husband there. He plays the bass. And so, yay, 15 years later, we're still married and have a family. It's great. So no, my dad really made a huge impact on my life there. And I think that, sadly, as a parent, I'm noticing even in myself that I sing less to my kids than my dad sang to me. Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to inspire that in myself, to share more of myself through my music to my kids, because I would hate to see that tradition leave, because it's brought so much joy to me. And then I went to college. At San Diego State University for voice, vocal performance. And there I was the SNATS chapter president. Very active from the very beginning. In fact, SNATS was one of the things that really, the school was unfortunately going through a major turnover with voice teachers, but also our opera director, who had been there for a really long time, retired. And so that wonderful wealth of information and education that came with that person was leaving the program, and SNATS actually was our vessel to kind of bridge that connection. We were able to fundraise to have a scenes program in the year that they were having that faculty turnover, and that was huge. So I really saw the value of SNATS and the connection that it was able to bring quickly at a fairly young age. And I was basically sold after that. I joined the San Diego NATS board. I was an independent voice teacher after I graduated with my bachelor's. So I did that for a chunk of time. And then I realized I was ready for pedagogy to make a little bit more sense to me than just kind of fiddling around the edges of somebody's voice. And I needed more. And so I went to New England Conservatory with Ian Howell and studied with Ian Howell for my master's in vocal pedagogy. And from there, he was incredibly gracious to hire me after my master's degree. I was the manager for the Voice and Sound Analysis Laboratory. And I also was the assistant vocal pedagogy director there. And in 2022, BOCO gave me a call and said, hey, we have these students who are doing their MFA in vocal pedagogy for musical theater. And we have a thesis requirement, and we need somebody to really help direct that process for them. And I had been doing it already with New England Conservatory students, and it was a really great fit. So I slowly transitioned. Now 100% of my time is with Boston Conservatory.
Wonderful.
Oh, my gosh, that's what a cool, and thank you for tying the thread all the way back to your father. I think there's something to be said about this, the passion. I mean, and the cherry on top is that he couldn't carry a tune. I think it's really
fantastic.
Truly, yeah. I think carrying that passion through to everything that you do, I think, is at the forefront of a lot of pedagogy teachers. I mean, it's the love and the art and the science of teaching, but it's that big, really holistic kind of picture there. I hear an idea for maybe a lullabies recital or a recording or CD coming along, Kayla.
I would love it. I would love that. I mean, I'm in a collection phase too, where I'm trying to collect new lullabies for my kids, because more and more there's lullabies about body positivity and building strong relationships and having, you know, big feelings. And I think there's a wealth of art to be had there for sure.
Yes, absolutely. So, how about you, Nicholas? Where did it start?
Gosh, I'm too old to go back to the beginning. As the elder statesman, at least of this group, I was not a child singer, and didn't start singing until I guess maybe my freshman year of high school, and it came up, then I did the whole fancy stuff and went to school, and I don't know, I was probably one of the youngest artists ever with the Santa Fe Opera. I think I was barely 22. I guess when I first apprenticed with Santa Fe, and then I share that only to say, and then my voice fell apart, and that's why I got interested in voice pedagogy. I got interested in voice pedagogy because I wanted to know what the heck was wrong with me. So I mean, I'll confess, on the front end of my teaching journey, it was selfish. I've said this on our own show, and then turned during my graduate school experiences and whatever, I had the great fortune to be a mentee and study in the home, in his actual house of the late Dr. Donald Miller, creator of Voce Vista. And Don was a dear mentor of mine through to his passing in 2020. And then went on to academia and did the stuff, and I'm now associate professor of voice and voice pedagogy here at Mississippi College in right outside of Jackson. I teach about 1,000 courses related to voice pedagogy, and I wish I was joking about that. I joked with someone very recently that I've taught every voice course known to man with the exception of lyric diction, which I have no intention of ever teaching. But no, I'm also our national vice president for outreach, and thereby helping to coordinate our SNATS chapters from the national level right now, through to, I guess, 2026. And been doing that for a few years, and I have a bunch of other roles in NATS also that I don't need to go into. I also host on my own podcast called Vocal Fry, which is your weekly dash of voice science, pedagogy, and pop culture, which Kayla has been on many times. And we're actually currently on hiatus at the very moment because my podcast co-host, Sarah, also had a baby about a month or 2 months after Kayla did. Yeah. And so it's been a fall of maternity leave. But we're hoping to get back to it soon. We'll at least release our annual Christmas episode. We always do a Christmas episode, but I don't know. Vocal Fry is kind of like our little, I think Ian actually was the one who said it was kind of like, it's turned into like our little pedagogy journal of what's kind of happening in the voice pedagogy world, which I guess is really what we wanted it to be in the first place, sort of. And you just have to put up with hearing about me talk about Star Wars at the same time. Although right now I'd be talking about Doctor Who, not Star Wars. But anyway, so that's a little bit about me.
You got to sprinkle in the pop references every once in a while. You got to pull in the crowds. I mean, so Star Wars and Doctor Who are good.
It's my brand. I mean, I would be nothing if it were.
I love that. Well, Jordan, I kind of want to jump in because I heard multiple mentions of voice science for both of you in both of the threads of your background in the modern day. And so, when Jordan and I, especially in Dr. Howell's class and then in other classes, it was so integrated in the curriculum that we were learning as students. But I don't think anybody really clarified how does voice science, what does it have to do with vocal pedagogy? How much are they married? And then how different are, what's the distinction? And I guess in the 21st century, as to pedagogy specialists, where do you think that intersection is? Can you talk more about voice science and how it's related to vocal pedagogy?
Yes. This is one of my favorite questions
Okay.
ever, because it is a little bit, there are many ways to look at it. And you asked the question in the framing, how does voice science relate to vocal pedagogy? I'm going to answer it in the opposite way for just so that I can build that bridge with my story. I'm going to tell you about what the vocal pedagogy has to do with voice science. Okay. So in the voice lesson, we have the student and the teacher role, right? The student is there to make the sound and the teacher is there to observe the sound, right? Hopefully the teacher is aiming for, in some way, a sound that is observable to them, right? Obviously, they need to hear the sound. It's measurable in some way with their ears. They can tell when something is different from the attempt before. Oh, you changed that and now it's different, right? So it's observable, it's measurable, and hopefully we understand that we get to a point where it's a little bit repeatable. And if you know anything about science and the scientific message, you just heard the words observable, measurable, repeatable, right? And so I do believe that in the voice lesson, we are using an empirical study, right? An observational study of our students. It's a study of one, N of one, if you might say. But if you have a studio and you use the same exercises on several students, well, now you got a pilot study, maybe N of 15, 20. And over time, you really get a sense of, you listen, you see the great teachers who've been doing this for 40 plus years and their ears are really, really well tuned and they understand the functional structure of what they're going to give during that experiment of a lesson, right? They're going to say, I've run through this experiment several times. They're not going to use that language, right? But they've run through the experiment several times and they know that if they give this certain protocol, they might expect this result. That is very similar, although over a long extended period of time, to what we would do in a voice research kind of capacity. When a student is doing an actual research project, when they have to make a protocol that says, if I do this, then I'm going to expect this result. And so there's a lot of parallel between the voice lesson and research.
Okay, so question for you then. So is research, as a scientist or voice scientist, is research kind of your bed for hypotheses, and then vocal science could be testing those hypotheses with your students, and going, and then that can inform your research? Is that kind of the process that that these interact and complement each other? Is that kind of along the lines that you're discussing?
Yes, I think I'm hearing in your question something that comes up a lot to me is the word science as opposed to research. Did you hear that too, Nick?
Yeah.
And so we tend to think about science as like these list of terms that we need to know, because that's what we experience it in vocal pedagogy classes, right? We need to know what a frequency is. We need to know what hertz is. We need to know what, all of the bits and bobs that go into understanding what a research paper is demonstrating to you, that you need to be conversant in that language in order to understand that science. But that's not the science itself. The science itself is the practice of the research, right? And so I hear voice science and my little ding ding bell goes off in my head of, are we actually talking about the process of science, of empirical observation of the voice? Or are we talking about the list of terms, the language surrounding the science?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And thanks for clarifying the difference between the two. So, Nicholas, what's your take in terms of this intersection between the two, and do you have to include voice science in your pedagogy curriculum, or how important is that inclusion?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question right there in terms of like evolving it into the curriculum, and I want to get to that point, but real quickly. I think Kayla pointed out a really important thing, which is like my very first instinct, like if I just go and show someone Voce Vista, they assume that I'm doing voice science. But that is not voice science at all. A voice scientist does measurable, observable, repeatable, tests to verify some sort of hypothesis or not, or null hypothesis. And we do that through many different methods of different things, depending on what we're looking at, whether that even would be just something as simple as a one-person pilot study that, is looking at a problem, just collecting acoustic samples, or something much more involved. But there's a beautiful thing that happens. So I don't want to get the curriculum quite yet. I want to say one other thing. With voice pedagogy, there is no discipline of voice pedagogy. Like, it doesn't exist. We're just teaching singing, right? I mean, that's what voice pedagogy is. And so what voice pedagogy classes have become are really the intersectionality of a whole bunch of subdisciplines of a whole bunch of other things. Like, that's really what voice pedagogy is the intersectionality of acoustics, physiology, health, practicum, your actual teaching, motor learning theory, exercise, science, it's repertoire knowledge and how to use repertoire, like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Too often I think we think of voice pedagogy as respiration, phonation, articulation, blah, blah, but but voice pedagogy, voice teaching is the intersectionality of a much larger pool of subfields. Voice science is the empirical investigation of the human voice. I mean, that's what, and so anyway, but I'll tee you off, Kayla. Getting to the question of how do we fit it into the curriculum, the real interesting thing to me is not just, that we have voice pedagogy curriculum, but how do we get people invested in exploring, wanting to be part of at least being able to discuss voice science and maybe tip their toes into trying voice science. And I think too often we're so concerned about it having to be a study that's publishable. Well, why can't we actually just expose people to what it's like to actually repeat a study and see what happens and make mistakes and make them big and make them wrong to learn? Because last time I checked, that's what we're supposed to be doing in the academy. Anyway, Kayla, you take that from there, right?
Oh, I'm raising the roof here because I do believe I'm on the same page with you, Nick, about what we're supposed to be doing in the academy. And really, there's no way to learn without an experiential element, at least not an effective way to learn. And so this idea, bringing it back to the curriculum, of what does vocal pedagogy have to do with voice science, or voice science have to do with vocal pedagogy? Well, we need the language to be able to converse in all of those different intersectionalities that Perna so lovingly explored. And it's a lot. And it's too, let's be honest here. It's too much for one person to be completely fluent in being able to converse in all of those different languages. It's too much. So I think as professors, one of the best things that we can do is help our students pick their thing that they're really interested in, have flexibility in the curriculum to be able to do some of that exploring in a very, very narrow question. But that very narrow question gives so much perspective on what it takes to really do the voice science arm, but also what it takes to be incredibly diligent in a process with a project or with a person, right? So my students, when they're doing their research and they're asking their very narrow question, how does I had a student who just presented at Voice Foundation this summer, and he was exploring how does volitional vibrato work for pop styles? Like what is that, right? Because pop singing is different than classical singing, is different than musical theater singing. There's some choice there. And does it have to do with emotions? And so that question that he narrowed down even further from there, because that's still a big question, allowed him to explore how one would make a choice of what to think about when you have like a long-term project. And that's what our students are. I mean, our voice students, hopefully they're staying with us for long enough that we can actually observe change, and we can actually see what the difference is that we've had in their lives being their voice teacher. And so it makes them more curious and thoughtful, but also more observant in their ears and in their eyes, and what they're willing to step back on and being like, oh, that is outside of the scope of my practice. I do not know that. That's a really big thing that we learn as researchers to say. And the students get better at that, not only in their research, but in their teaching. So I think it's one of those things where like the skill set of a voice researcher and of a voice teacher have a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate you bringing up, or just really clarifying these terms for voice science and voice pedagogy, because, I think, even classical music or musical theater, they're just so giant of a classifier. Like there's so many things that go into each thing. Another thing, I've been a lot more involved in the pop folk kind of side of things lately. And if you say you're working with a producer, that role is a lot of different roles, right? It's there's mixing, mastering, and then also just arranging and knowing what instruments to choose. And you go to different people for different skill sets. So I really appreciate that perspective. And I think what I'd love to do now is talk about with when you're teaching students one-on-one as a teacher, as opposed to teaching your curriculum on vocal pedagogy, how does your study in the field of vocal pedagogy influence your decisions with these individual students? Did I phrase that right?
Yeah, okay. I think I understood it. If
All right.
I answer it wrong, will you tell me?
Yes.
So I can correct it. So this last summer, I also presented at Voice Foundation, and what I presented on at Voice Foundation was how bra fit impacts respiration for singing. And wouldn't you know, when you're wearing a tight bra around your chest, it becomes a little bit more difficult to expand your rib cage. And what happens with the body when it's difficult to expand your rib cage, but you still have to sing the same pitch and phrase duration, is that you compensate. And we're excellent compensators. We are so good at it. Anytime we have a hindrance, we might not even notice that we are compensating. And so through that process, is about a year-long process from thinking about the study, building my hypothesis around it, executing the study, and then preparing for that presentation. I was able to see more clearly in my one-on-one students the moments in which they started compensating when something got difficult, or when the space around them changed. I had a student I was actually singing in a concert with them as a soloist, and we had a rehearsal space, but then the actual concert venue was much different, right? And being able to observe that compensation difference in my student, I was just cued into that, because that's what I was thinking about. That was my world at the moment, my mind world. And so it really did have an impact on how I listened to my student, because I saw it through a different perspective.
So if you're looking to buy a Honda Civic, you start seeing Honda Civics on the road everywhere you go.
Everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Very
Yep.
interesting.
Oh, can I share a perspective on that? Because I've had to... I do not consider myself a voice scientist, and I'd like to say that. I do not have a PhD in communication sciences, and I don't. But I also have been either part of or the PI on multiple human subjects testing. And I've done a bunch of efficacy studies, and one of the things that is really incredible when you're doing an efficacy study is that people assume so much, like that they are doing a thing so badly. And we as humans are so bad at knowing what we're doing. and the brain is a really powerful thing, and if we believe a thing, gosh, it can accomplish a lot. And we were studying laryngeal massage manipulation a few years ago, and for a number of years here with the medical center. And we were trying to see if it elicited a change in people's ability to warm up faster or easier or whatever, if it better prepared them for performance. And some people would walk away after doing it just being just like, oh, I feel so great. And then we would look at their airflow and their efficiency, zero change, none whatsoever. And so, I mean, it's really remarkable thinking about, this from both sides as both voice teacher and having actually, participated in science. You do, as Kayla was kind of like saying about, just doing it with students and training them in the scientific study of something. You also then realize in your voice lesson that the idea that you gave somebody, and if it worked and if it elicited a change, fantastic. Who knows if it was actually what you suggested the student actually did or not?
That's a very real thing.
Yes.
I know specifically working with a voice teacher, I remember going for like almost half a year, and I was doing the thing that the teacher, like what I thought the teacher was saying, and then realized a half year later, it's like, oh, I'm doing the exact opposite of the thing that he's been telling me. And then when I made that switch, it like made all the difference. But like, man, I guess that's a testament to like checking in with your students and figuring out what you're saying is what they're hearing and what it means to that student, right? That's
absolutely.
Wow.
And there are so many communication breakdown points that could happen. There's so many. I mean, forget, after the lesson when they go into the practice room and then try to recreate what they experienced. I mean, things can go downhill really fast. And I think what this brings into, like, I'm going to tie it back to our scientific skills, because what I would love to see is when in that moment when my students like, gosh, this is not working, for them to rely on the play that we worked in the lesson to kind of experiment with themselves, self-experiment, to see what levers they can move in order to get back to the efficiency that they were feeling when it was great. Not the negative self-talk of like, why is this not working? I'm failing at this, this is why am I spending $60,000 on my graduate degree, right? I mean, it's a good question, but in those moments in the practice when it's not working, like it hurts. It's really hard to keep going in those times. And it's not helping your voice in any way. We know that the stress is not helping. So having that kind of like play attitude that goes along with research and curiosity of like, oh, but if I'm not going to like judge it. I'm just going to be like, oh, but if I change this thing, will that change the outcome? That's the hypothesis testing that I'm asking them to do as a student as well.
And there you tied it into the subdiscipline of motor learning theory into everything else. And see, so like I said, really this whole thing is just a big intersectionality of it's a timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly mess.
Yeah.
Nick, I love it for that, because I think that I don't think that there's ever going to be a time when I'm bored of it. And if there is, it's because I stopped asking the cool questions, but it's just like an infinite sea of opportunity for what we could explore in singing. So the book has not been written
so much.
Yeah.
Can I ask then on this? So I hear a lot of creativity and experimentation. I mean, graduate school and undergrad as a student is, in an ideal world, this sandbox of you can fail and you can feel safe to fail, ideally, and fail fast, learn, do it over again. I see the creativity in both of your teaching process, but do you feel like there's room for innovation in the academic world? I know that Nicholas said, let's be safe to fail in our research and all of this stuff. Is that a reality in this day and age? Are we allowed to talk about that?
I mean, I'll start with this one. It is in my program.
Yeah.
I can't speak for every program, but it's encouraged in my program. Okay. And to be quite frank, like when they're undergrads, the day that they learn that they don't want to be a professional singer is the day that they succeeded.
Oh.
So, I mean, it's not just the day that you first sang at the Met or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I can only speak for my program, though.
Okay.
Kayla?
Yeah, I mean, that just makes me think of something that I often try to instill in my students. And I teach grad students mostly in the thesis curriculum, right? Or exclusively in the thesis curriculum. But I teach undergrad for voice. And one of the things that I really try to instill in the students is that it's just the starting point. I think a lot of the pressure of academia and how we build curricula has to do with how do we prepare students for the real world? How do we prepare students so that immediately upon graduation, they're going to have success? And Nick, you're alluding to this, and I'll just, hammer the nail one more time. Yes, like you have to define your own success first in order to figure out if you actually made it. And it can change. It can change up until it's never too late to change. It can change. It can change. And
it will change.
It has to, right? I mean, and that's really our hope, is that we're changing in the direction that is going to lead you to the next step, not in the direction that's going to lead you like exactly to the future, right? It's not a linear path to where you're going to end up. I'm not on a linear path. I'm on a very circuitous path. And I'm not going to expect or set up the expectations of my students or in my curricula that the minute that they graduate, they're ready for this supposed perfect future next step. It's just one step. And then they'll take a next step. They'll decide if they want to change direction then.
I love that. Success is already a dangerous term. What the heck does that mean? And I understand the big feat that an institution has to define what success means, but by defining success, you prioritize certain things over other things. And so I love, Kayla, that you said, no, I prepare my students for the next step, not what success ends up meaning for an institution. So I think that's a great way to package that. I was just curious,
But on the flip side of that also doesn't mean that, for example, I don't have high standards
right.
in my program, or of my expect great things, or that it's bad to set a goal. And have, even if your path is, going around and around, you still need, actually having somewhere where you'd like to go, even if it's circular, is still a good thing. That's different from having the freedom to, goof up, as it were.
Right.
I am so on that same path. I think that high expectations are really important, and it also teaches somebody how to decide what's important to them. Especially when we're talking about academia, it's okay to choose to fail something. It's okay to say, I'm putting this ball down so that I can pick up this other ball right now. And to be very communicative with your professors about that when you are putting down their ball. Let me just put that out there for a second. It's okay to do that. We're adults generally.
We'd appreciate it if you did tell us.
If you just told us.
That would be great.
Can't speak for everyone out there, but I think I know a lot of us, and I think I can say a majority of us vocal ed professors would be very pleased if our students were very thoughtful about their responsibilities and what they were able to do in a certain week or in a certain time frame, and said, I can do this and I can't do this, or I can do this and I can do this later, right? Just putting that out there for all you SNATS folks. My Boco SNATS.
Well, it's like, listen, it's like the great old saying, you can do everything you want to in life. You just probably can't do it all at the same time.
Yeah. Oh.
Which means that you probably can't do every single thing you want to do in an academic experience. But I think, if I'm disappointed in anything, sometimes it's that sometimes we're so focused on the requirements that we don't take advantage of the good possibilities.
Opportunities.
If we don't take advantage of the opportunities and we only focus on the requirements, when maybe the requirements aren't necessarily the thing that we need to be focusing on in the first place. God, what am I saying?
Requirements.
Oh no, they're cutting off our internet.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening. No, that's a really good point. It really is. Well, yeah, Jordan, I don't know if I'm now curious more into kind of the skills and what should a responsible voice teacher be teaching, and all these different things. But before we go, is there anything else, Jordan, that you wanted to cover kind of in the or for this team, Nicholas or Kayla, anything else you think we kind of missed, or there's opportunity to discuss about kind of how voice pedagogy is presented in academia, in our curriculum, any opportunities for room for growth, kind of, but before we move into kind of the skill set of the teacher itself and the opportunities for teachers these days.
There is one thing that I would love to ask and get a little bit more information from you guys from, which was, Kayla, you were mentioning making the studio space like a place where you could play, right?
Mm-hmm.
And play around. And I would love to talk more about how you develop that in your studio, in your practice, and how that in turn influences students' own personal practice.
There are several ways that I do this. I really do try to make this this zone of non-judgment. I have a studio mirror, which many voice teachers have, and I know the relationship that a lot of people have to a mirror. It can be really, for lack of a better word, triggering. And honestly, when I introduced my studio space to my students, like, that's the first thing I said. This is the mirror of non-judgment. Like, this is the space where we're observing for change, not observing for critique. And I really try to cue in my students to when things change, not good, bad, not that toggle, but just that was different. And having that like language shift, I think was important for me in my journey, for my own practice of just having the motivation to wake up in the morning and want to sing. I think I was really, after grad school, as you have experienced as well, it's very difficult to self-motivate when there's not that like panic, I have to do this thing because I committed myself to it and everyone else is expecting me to have that kind of more peaceful meditative relationship with your voice where you keep coming back to it. And I had to switch up my language around how I observed my own voice to be non-judgmental language. I needed to strip the good bad out, and I still slip up sometimes, and I generally try to note that and use that as a learning opportunity for my students of like, oh, if I gave the good cue instead of the yes again cue, then I use that as a learning opportunity for myself and for my students to be like, we don't need that one. we don't need the good bad philosophy. We can say this serves you for this style, for this emotional choice, for this moment in time, for this acoustic environment. This serves you. This doesn't serve you as well. So then they become more of an artist, right? Of a vocal artist that's choosing their palette, that's choosing their brushstroke, that's choosing not because it's better or worse, not because the expectation it has already been set that it has to be this way, but because they have the flexibility in their own mind of how they think about, dare I even say, classical singing, that it can be a play. We can play our instrument. We can play our voice.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was great. I don't even want to add anything to that. That was, yeah.
Even Nick was just like,
I'm good.
I'm good. That was a good drop the mic. It was great. All right, so I'm sold. Wow, Kayla, Nick, this is great. Okay, I'm a student. I'm graduating. I'm really interested in jumping into the fields. What skills do I need? How, baseline. I'm looking at all these job postings and I go, oh man, I hope I have these foundational skills to start looking here. Where do I go?
Well, can I just say something first just about being a voice teacher rather than just like jumping into
Great.
The thing that I always say to my teachers in training, and this really applies to our SNATS audience, you will only learn how to teach voice by teaching voice. You have to get your sea legs. That's how I always put it. And you will say stupid things and make mistakes, and you won't ruin anyone's life, hopefully, unless you're just being a terrible person. And don't do that. But just, you are not going to be perfect at teaching voice the first time you teach a voice lesson. Don't expect to be. And give yourself your own freedom in that to just discover things. So anyway, that's just a starting voice teaching thing. We can take it to the actual, getting into voice pedagogy and stuff now. But I just wanted to say that about being a voice teacher is you're not going to learn unless you actually do the thing. Just like singing.
And sometimes that's built into the curriculum, and sometimes it's absolutely not. Right?
I know it is in both of ours, but I mean.
But a lot of people are performance majors that become teachers, and voice teaching is not part of their academic experience. They're just learning on the job, which is exciting. But maybe send your cards to your first students 5 years after and say, hey, here's what I would do differently. No. Hopefully you still, I just dropped something, but hopefully you still have a good relationship with your students that you can keep in touch.
Which is go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, which is, it raises a good point where, some students go, or some professional singers who have maybe never taught before, they've had this great career, and people say, this person knows how to sing.
Yep.
And then they go into teaching, that could be problematic to the point that you're just talking about. So, okay.
It could also be great. Some people are really amazing teachers out the gate.
But, some of the best of them are really curious. I'll point to our dear friend Yvonne Redman, who is one of the most curious humans alive, who came out of a Met career, entered academia, had taught some, but then, remained just constantly curious and wanting to learn. And if you're going to be a teacher, being a good teacher is being curious.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Yvonne also does voice research.
Indeed.
She's now a published author on several studies.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I know that we were talking about different skill sets, so we've gone kind of back and forth, but other kind of pillars of skills that you would recommend?
Yes. First things first. Personal connections. You're gonna see. Here's the thing: you're gonna read the job listing, and you're gonna. Well, at least I say, even with now, I'm entering my 5th year of teaching at conservatory levels. I look at the job listing and I go, I'm not qualified. I don't have
I've been doing this for 20 years, and I look at jury and I'm like, I'm not qualified for that position.
Yeah. And that's the way that they're purposefully built that way, usually via committee. The job listings are usually a wonderful potpourri of everybody's wish list of what their person could be, but it's like 5 different people in one job description.
Yeah.
And it really is where it's setting up for impossible expectations. And I think that's where a lot of really excellent voice teachers don't even apply for the positions because they think that they're not qualified or it's not going to be right. And I just have to say, it's okay if you don't have everything that's on the checklist It's okay. If you're bringing your whole self and you want to try, let them weed you out. Don't weed yourself out of your dream just because you don't meet all of the expectations.
Yeah, and if we're specifically talking about positions in higher education, like who, might end up teaching voice pedagogy classes or something like that, I think there's a really important thing of learning about the institutions that you're applying to, because what they're going to value is going to be very different. So if you're applying to an R1 state institution, practically the only thing they're going to care about is where you're singing and how you're singing. If you're applying to a teaching college, a liberal arts school, somewhere where they are maybe really need musical theater voice teacher, where they really need or whatever, you may not need as big a performance resume to get that interview. But I will say, unfortunately, in the state of higher ed music, I will still say there is a truth that is out there that we just need to be honest about, which is you sing your way to an interview. Maybe you teach your way to a job, but unfortunately you do sing your way to an interview. So in terms of the skill sets that you need to have, yes, I want to be producing people who are good voice teachers. I want the people who are finishing our graduate programs to be very fine voice teachers. I also, in their own style, this doesn't have to be classical singing at all anymore. I need them to be good at something and be able to demonstrate a modicum of professional singing at an entry-level position in their style. Again, it doesn't have to be singing, O mio babbino caro, who cares? But I do think that we need to admit the reality that that's part of where we are still, is that very often you sing your way to an interview and teach your way to a job.
Really,
I think that's,
yeah. Go ahead, Kayla.
It's great. It's great advice. I also think that the other thing that, if you're looking at the job posting, that you should do, not just look, know what institution you're applying to and what they value and what they're really going to be evaluating you based off of, but make personal connections.
Yes.
With the people who are making the decisions. And it's a very short list of folks. we were talking about how the small world of vocal pedagogy, and it's a very short list of folks. Anyone who is applying, the community who's making the decision, they're going to call out and they're going to say, hey, do you know this person? Not just your references, but they're going to call out to their own network. And do you know this person? Are they a good person? Do they have good people skills? Can we have a conversation about hard things? To like being an excellent colleague right now in your studenthood, or right now in your volunteer position, or right now when you think nobody's looking, like being an excellent person is really a baseline, because it's very difficult. You can professionally develop, especially if you have those baseline skills like Nick just laid out. But what we don't want to do is learn how to be a decent human on the job.
1,000%. I agree with this 1,000%.
Yeah.
And how do you go about doing that? Do you meet at conferences? Do you reach out via LinkedIn? Do you put a public profile together that they can view? I mean, what are ways that you've found have been really successful in reaching out, connecting, knowing people?
I mean, I can start if you want. I started a podcast.
Exactly.
But I say that kind of as a joke, to be honest, because that was not our intention when we started the podcast. But now, like the network, I mean, and I had a network already, but like the network that we now have is the Vocal Fam. I mean, like when I think about our network, it kind of astounds me, to be completely honest.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'll be honest. Yes. I mean, going to conferences. Yes. When you can afford to go to a conference, if you're a student, if you can seek student travel funding, particularly if you can get a poster accepted. Nats National posters close in 3 days. Please submit your poster submissions for Knoxville.
Get 'em in.
December 1st is the deadline. We'd like some more submissions, please. But go to a conference, even if it's if I may, participate in Nats. Like, go to your local chapter auditions and get involved.
Yeah.
Be on the board. You don't have to be the president. Be the social media coordinator, or be the I don't know, Friday drinks night coordinator, or whatever, and if I may, those of you who are students out there listening, your student network is a network. Mm-hmm. Your current network is a first part of your professional network. Don't be a jerk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard so many stories of, my hallmate, I was, good or a jerk to them, and then saying next to them 10 years later, or didn't get a job because they were the conductor of that orchestra years later. You just never know, but you're so right.
I'd like to add something to this too, because I think there's a nuance here. I have a lot of students that are very stressed about their lives, and I am too. I got 4 kids. I've got a full-time job. Things are chaos, but beautiful. Okay. We have to learn, once you get into adulthood, right, not to burn out. You have to make space in your life so that you can be a gracious person when somebody is making your life harder, and to learn how to have those tough but beautiful connective conversations when things go wrong, and not just be that explosive, reactive, experienced person. And that is a skill that you can build in studenthood, like very well. And to show that skill off, because when somebody asks me to write the reference letter, you bet that's going in there. It's going in there. They can keep their cool under pressure. And that says a lot about, to the committee that's hiring, about what kind of person they're bringing in.
I agree.
Wonderful. Well, Jordan, I know that, so we're a good amount into the conversation here. I really wanted to get into the kind of the career success, because both of you guys have had some really great stories from your students that I think would be really important for students that are listening here to know. Like you said, we're stressed about, can I find a job? Can I, get all of this success in the real world? Yes, the answer is yes. And so I'd like to hear a little bit about some of those real world examples of career success that, from recent graduates or students in the past that can show that there is a lot of good out there in going through this path.
Can I share one real quick? Because my advice in this regard, and then I'll share the example, is if your professor offers you to collaborate with them, say yes. Okay? Because a number of years ago, when we were setting up our relationship with the hospital, I brought on a bunch of students to help us with that project. And one of those, once she was committed to doing that, I said, now you're going to start a podcast with me. And she said, well, that sounds stupid. But she said, okay. And now Sarah Pygott, my collaborator, was not only part of 2 Nats National presentations with me, but was a Nats intern last summer, and is currently my colleague who shares the office next door to me, after being away for a few years doing the teaching thing. And so I mean, I would just say one of the things is, and to my colleagues out there who are already in the profession, involve your students in your stuff. Anyway, sorry, Kayla, you want to take it from there?
No, I think that's great. I'd like to, ring that bell several times, because it's difficult. The question, even the fact that we know that the question is being asked of like, oh, how do I start this thing, it means that it's difficult, and we should acknowledge it. Like it seems like there's some secret sauce about academia and how this thing all works. I'm a first generation college student in my family. There's nobody else went to college, so I had a lot of figuring it out. And I'm still doing a lot of figuring it out. That to a lot of my colleagues, like, things are like, well, of course it's this way because it's academia. And I'm like, but why? I'm still asking those hard questions. Maybe I'll come jaded in 5 more years, but we'll see. All right. So Nick, what do you think?
I'm going to just stay out of this part of this conversation.
Give me the over under. At what point am I going to stop asking why? All right, so I'd like to echo what we said before in this brag fest that I'm about to do. I'd like to echo what we said before of like, it's if you graduated, it means you got to the next step. Great, you are successful, good job, you did your thing. And I'm going to pull out a few of my students that they're all doing great. That's the thing, is like all my students are doing their next thing, and I'm so proud of all of them, but I'm just going to shine a light on a few of them. So bringing it back to collaborating with your professors, I had the opportunity to get a grant from our faculty development grant for DEI, and it was about inclusive learning. And one of my students was doing his research project on universal design for voice teaching. His name is Adam Moxness, and he took universal design for learning, which is a framework for how to engage students who have autistic ways of being, ADHD, like a number of neurodiverse challenges or even physical challenges, to make a universally designed learning experience for them so that everybody has access to the education. And so we're taking that framework that they had, and he applied it to voice teaching in the studio, and lots and lots of good work came out of that, of how to build your studio around this idea of universal design and universal access for voice learning. Wow. And we won the grant. And this entire academic year, we've been doing a study on the faculty use of some of these tools that are already in use for the faculty, of like, how much do you provide multiple modalities for learning music? Do you just train by ear, or do you look at sheet music as well? All these different questions, right? And so he was instrumental in that grant, and was able to come and give a workshop to the Berklee and Boco voice faculty on universal design for voice teaching. So like, he graduated, and then all of a sudden we hired him to come and give us a workshop on the knowledge that he created in that process of his thesis research. So like, that's like a shining example of what I love my students to be able to do, is like, they get their niche question, they become a little bit of an expert in that one thing. They know their scope of practice, they know what they're able to answer, and then they get to really shine in that expertise. And those are the things that really help connect people for jobs. He actually was hired immediately he's now at Vitaliano University teaching voice. Amazing. Wow. Will Pajora is at Berklee. Colin Brisky is at Baldwin Wallace University. Rose Van Dyne, who graduated in 23, this last May, won PAVA Best Student Poster Presentation for her work in her thesis work was around the experience of musical theater singers working on Broadway, young musical theater singers that are people of color, and what that experience is like, and how that identity has shaped their experience as a Broadway singer. It's really fascinating and amazing work, and she's great at presenting because she has done a lot of practice in it. Sarah DeYoung is going to be presenting at the NATS conference in 2024 for trauma-informed vocal ped with several of my colleagues that I connected her with, right? So I knew the researchers who were doing the groundwork for trauma-informed voice teaching, and I was like, Sarah, if you're interested in this, we got to get you connected with these people so that you can do the NATS conference, right? That leverage that I use in my connections to get these people their next step, like, you can ask for that as a student, and your professor can be generous with their network as well, and hopefully that flows both ways. I've got Evan Reese, who is a music director on Broadway, just rocking it. I can really go on. Like everyone's doing fantastic. But I just have to say, like, all of that through line of all of those names that I just listed, I mean, go look them up. Go listen to the recording back and go, because they're real people and they can be really connected. Even though they're at the beginning of their career process, they're going to be, at the middle sometime. So learn about them, learn about their research if you're interested in them, connect with them. I mean, there's a Facebook group out there called the New Forum for Professional Voice Teachers, and we can have a lot of feelings about Facebook, but one of the things that it does is it has made me recognize that these are real people. You can actually talk to them. you can just message them or ask your question and make connections that way as well.
And really, I think your point about connections even really speaks back to me when I was a student, because I would not be here had, as a doctoral student, I not sent this crazy man in the Netherlands an email and said, I think I need your Voce Vista software, and I want to learn more about it, and I'm applying for a grant, which I was very fortunate to win, and I would like to connect with you. And then we started, and Don and I started corresponding. But it's connection. I mean, I just straight up cold emailed him. I didn't know him from hither, and listen, most of us, if you do contact us, most of us are very generous with our time. We're not looking to, particularly if someone's like, oh, I've read your research on blah, 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 blah. I'd really love to, and most of the time we're like, my God, someone read that? That seems impossible. So I mean, it is so much success in this business. Even in the music business, so much of it is about connections, as we all know. I mean, and the networking thing, that's really what we should be teaching our students is networking. I mean, because that is so much of this business. I mean, whatever business we're even talking about anymore.
Any money making venture, hopefully money making.
I mean, most businesses, right? I mean, isn't that
right?
We're trying, Nick.
Gosh, and it, to underline another point, Kayla, of what you're talking about is that anybody listening here, that could have been their name that you listed on here, So and the
Yes.
only thing stopping them is you saying no. You saying, no, I can't really do this. I shouldn't apply. I shouldn't, if you're following along from our conversation today, I feel like the underline of our whole conversation is the 3 C's: communication, connection, and curiosity. I mean, those are really the tenets of a lot of what I'm hearing from the both of you. And if you lean into a lot of those things, you have an amazing community of people that would be willing to help. So it's encouraging, at least for me, to hear, and I think it will be for a lot of our audience listening as well. So
and I would add a 4th C.
Oh,
because those 3 things then lead to collaboration.
Oh yeah.
Which is really what our field in the end is all about now.
Yeah. Love this. Love it. Well, Jordan,
we just
go ahead.
we just got a shout out from Dr. Howell. He's in watching this, so hello, Dr. Howell. Wanted to throw that out there.
On the Twitch.
On the Twitch. Thank you
Nice.
for joining us live on Twitch.
Love to hear it. So, Jordan, Kayla Nicholas, any final closing pieces of feedback, advice for our audience members, maybe listening to the recording, one audience member listening currently, anything that you'd like to close for our, I think, very helpful, really impactful conversation about the industry right now? Anything?
I have a thing. My thing is that I hope folks use this as a stepping off point for getting curious about something in a deep way. So I think a lot of times voice people, we get curious about things in shallow ways. We're like, oh, that's interesting. And then we think somebody's probably already written the book on that. Somebody's probably already written the chapter on that. Somebody's probably already done the research paper on that. And let me tell you, as somebody who's in the literature constantly, there are more holes than actual content for voice science and vocal pedagogy writing. Like, really, if you have something that you are deeply curious about and you go and you search and you can maybe find things that have intersection with your question, but you'll just find more questions. I promise. I do this for a living. I promise. You'll just find more questions that are out there to be answered. And you don't need a fancy lab in order to do a lot of really good work. But you could make friends that have fancy labs to do good work if you get curious enough, right? Like Nick said about his relationship and his connection with Dr. Miller,
Don,
right?
yeah.
Was he a doctor?
Yeah,
Dr. Miller.
By that point, yes.
Yeah. Is because he had already a question that he was knowledgeable about in order to make a meaningful connection, right? And so that curiosity really helps build bridges here.
I love that advice so much. I think, especially pointing out the deep versus shallow, as you go in with your question, sure, maybe you will find the book written right on that question, but you might find out that's actually not what your question was. When you get into it and you really dive into it, you find those little nuances that really pull you into the direction where you can make a serious contribution. So thank you so much for that.
And I guess my last thought, to tail off of what Kayla just said, that we mentioned earlier, is be curious about whatever the heck you're curious about. Like, if you're curious about why Bjork is awesome, be curious about that, and don't let your classical Western tendencies of singing have anything to do with it. Like, be curious about why Bjork is awesome. And then figure out how to narrow that down.
Yeah.
But still be interested in why Bjork is awesome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like don't limit yourself to why do 19th century singing Italian tenors turn over at F sharp. We did that study. We did it 78 times. I mean, not to say that there couldn't be more done, Kayla.
We could totally do it. What are you talking about?
I'm sure we can. But like be interested in what you're interested in, and if that is, whatever it is, be interested in that, and then figure out how to navigate it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, lovely. Communication, connection, curiosity, and collaboration. Amazing things to take away from the conversation. Kayla Gautereaux, Nicholas Perna, thank you so much for this incredible conversation. If you're curious on how to find out more, we're going to leave some descriptions, some links in the description following the show. Thanks for taking the time, and thanks for shining a spotlight on what I'm sure a lot of people are curious about, and I think they're going to start asking more questions. So that's the first step in making a meaningful connection in their career, and I just want to thank you for taking the time today to help them do that.
Our pleasure.
All
It's
right.
a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Thank you all.